until April 4th as a class because we have a holiday when you all get back from spring break. So we're actually skipping 2 weeks of this class. You'll notice I have your homework assignment due on the day we're not meeting. So be aware that you still have an assignment due, but your discussion, you have just one discussion for this 2-week period, and it isn't due until the 4th. So I just wanted to call this out in case anyone had any questions about what is due, when are we meeting. I'll see you on the 4th. And what's great about this is the 4th is also going to be a hybrid class because I will be on campus. For those of you who would like to meet on campus for this class session, you're welcome to. Otherwise, I'll be on Zoom from CGU. And the reason for that is we have the Claremont College's UX Mixer that day. So I'll show you this. If you didn't see this in Slack, if you'd like to attend, it's Friday, April 4th from 6 to 8 p.m. We'll be at the Drucker Institute building on Dartmouth. And you do need to register, like, please RSVP. But we also have a few slots for student presenters. They're going to be 5-minute lightning talks. So anyone who submits that you'd like to present, it's a 5-minute lightning talk. I don't need your slides and everything until the day before, but I do need sort of title and what you're going to be presenting on. And you can fill that out in the form. If you'd like to say, yeah, I'm interested in presenting, then you can put yourself forward in the RSVP. Everyone, I put alumni, friends, faculty, staff across the Claremont colleges. Everyone's welcome to attend. Anyone interested in product, UX, or human-centered design. We usually have 40 or 50 people, including alums and current students and such. So it's a good kind of networking opportunity if you are interested in pursuing a career in UX or product. So I super encourage you all to be there. We're gonna play some games. I give away prizes. It's a good time. Does anyone have any questions about the mixer? Okay, so after this, I won't see you until this day, but for some of you, I'll see you in person. All right. Anything else that we needed to cover? Let me think. I don't think so. We'll talk about your final project and we'll do some little breakout sessions around your final project at toward the end of class. But today we're going to be going through the content of the book. So chapter 3, talking about the stats for point estimation. And, I think maybe some of you realized that this book is going to be a love or hate thing, right? Chapter 3 really gets into the divisiveness of this book. So, based on your reading discussion, I guess I'll pull that up now. Based on your reading discussion, I want to congratulate all of the first year UX Master's students who just completed their final stats exam yesterday in regression. Hooray! And then I know some of you were cramming for that test and focusing on that, and then you went home and you read this chapter. And my heart hurts for you just a little bit. But it's like, stats, it never ends. Here we are, you're back. So some of you had that experience. Let's see, other comments, formulas. Some people are total formula people. Other people, formulas add nothing to the education experience for them. So, thank you for talking about that as well. And it looks like a lot of you were able to get a little bit of a refresher on confidence intervals, which we will continue to refresh today with some real world style case studies and things like that. So I guess I wanted to open it up. Did anyone have anything come out of this reading on confidence intervals that you would like to make sure we cover in this class, in this session today? Any burning questions or topics that you're honestly still a little uncertain about besides geometric mean? Well, I invite you, as we're walking through this, drop things in the chat, or of course, raise your hand and be like, I don't get it, Dani. Slow down, rewind, say it again in a different way. But if something comes up for you, drop it in the chat so that we can discuss it together, because if it's coming up for you, it's probably coming up for everyone. Okay, so now we're entering the world of quantitative usability testing. And quite frankly, if you can master quant usability testing, you will have a UX research superpower that most people in the industry do not have. And that will make you a very useful and interesting candidate when applying for jobs. So even if stats is not your forte, I think it is useful to be able to run some of these basic tests, some of these numbers, so you can be a really strong usability tester. So you can do both quant and qualitative usability testing. And just to remind you, pull these things from memory, we talked about constructs last time. We talked about the construct of usability. This thing, this concept in the world that we're trying to tap into, that we're trying to measure. And we're defining that as people can accomplish their goals effectively, efficiently, and in a way that satisfies them. So lots of different ways to tap into that construct, lots of different ways to measure that construct. We talked about other constructs that are like this, health. How do we measure health? I think I mentioned love. That's my favorite psychological construct. How would you measure whether someone loves someone, right? So you might ask them questions, you might observe behaviors, you might classify those behaviors numerically or qualitatively, then you'd come to some conclusion. Yes, I am a robot. That's how I perceive just about everything in the world. And honestly, the more research methods classes you take, the more stats classes you take, you start to be able to wear that hat, right? Where all of a sudden everything is just constructs and measurement, and like, how would I quantify that? Or how would I confidently state that that thing is occurring, or that behavior is going to translate to a different context? So this is all the fun and games of UX research. I also want to cover again, you're gonna get so sick of this slide. I want to cover again summative and formative usability tests. So can anyone describe an example of either a formative or a summative usability test?
I guess a formative is sort of like you don't really know what's going on with the website yet, and you're trying to use the usability testing to understand, just like on the surface level, what problems could people be experiencing, obstacles that can be preventing them from completing whatever action they need to complete on the site. And then a summative sounds like you already know what features are available, and the stakeholders or the company was like, I want to know specifically how this feature is holding up on our website, and what are some quantitative ways that we can measure that: clicks, bottlenecks, or like errors that are happening.
Yeah, I'm hearing a few good things in there. So there's this sense of formative is kind of early stages, summative is later stages, right? And then you also mentioned coming up with a list of problems for formative, whereas summative, I always think summative score. Summative score. That helps me to think about, like, if I need to just say whether how usable something is. And especially if I need to say how usable something is so that I can compare it to something else. That would be a summative study. And another way to think about this is most of the time formative is going to produce a list of problems that you found that could be fixed. Find and fix formative. And summative will produce some kind of score or some kind of, ranking, rating you can use to compare multiple things. Based on these two definitions, get out your stamps and let me know your final project that you proposed. Which approach do you think you're taking? You can just stamp on whichever side of the screen. Great. So most of you, as I imagined would be the case, most of you are going to take a formative approach, where you're going to come up with a list of problems and report that out as your findings, as your final deliverable. Some of you are going to take a summative approach, where you're either going to say, this website scored 70 out of 90 or something, or you're going to compare two things, right? You're going to redesign an existing website and then compare the old version to your new version and see which one wins. And maybe a couple of you are unsure or submitted both or something. Oftentimes, summative tests kind of become formative tests, because as you're summarizing things, you do identify the list of some of the problems that are driving the low score or the high score. Nick, did you have a comment or a thought?
Yeah, because I was thinking like I feel like if depending on the description of, or when I looked at the description of like the tests that we're going to be running, kind of seems like we are doing both. Because if we're creating a prototype and then comparing it to the last one, wouldn't that make it summative? Or it would be formative if the new prototype was based on our findings?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So everyone's going to be redesigning the experience that they test. It's just whether you do it at the beginning. So, for example, some of you actually reached out to me and were like, I have really strong feelings about this app, whatever app it is, right? I have really strong feelings about this I don't know, I have a to-do list type notification app on my phone and it's not very user friendly. I bet if I changed these two things, people would find it more usable. So instead of going through a usability test to find out that other people hate what I hate, I'm just going to redesign it. And I'm going to say, here's the old version, here's my version, and I'm going to compare the two. And that's a classic comparative summative test. We're making a bunch of assumptions that the changes you made are driving the change in score, essentially, that you might find. So that would be a classic comparative test or a summative test. The rest of you who are doing formative, you're going to put users in front of the existing experience, have them go through a workflow, and then you're going to find a few problems, like maybe 3 people all made the same comment, or maybe 3 people all failed at the same point, something like that. Then you're going to report 3 out of 5 users failed at this point. So my recommendation is to fix the login workflow at this point. And that's a classic formative study. So I know there was still confusion, and I think, I'm not sure if I said this last time, but the assignment you just turned in is for me to give you feedback ASAP in the next 48 hours so that you can be thinking about your final project over the next 2 weeks when we don't have class. And this assignment in terms of your grade is worth it's worth 10 points of a pool of like 1,000 points or something. I mean, there's nothing, even if you got a 0 on it, it wouldn't affect your grade, your final grade. The whole point is just to give you feedback. So if this difference was a little unclear, like a little muddy to you when you submitted this, we'll start to clean that up so you can move forward with either formative or summative. And if a lot of you are going to give me a scope that's huge, I'm going to test this entire app. I'm going to find all the problems. I'm going to, work with users for an hour to find all the problems in this app. And I'm going to say, maybe just this workflow, or maybe just these 2 workflows. And maybe you're only going to spend 20 minutes with each person. So that's the other piece that I'll be giving you feedback on is your scope reasonable for the time frame? Great. Okay, I love the glitter that we're doing. You can continue doing that at any time. I hope you all know that. On all images, you can just glitter them if that makes you happy. Does anyone have any other thoughts or questions related to formative and summative? Again, in the wild, I've heard these terms maybe, I don't know, 6 times in my whole career. Someone saying I want a summative test or I want a formative test. Probably won't come up for you. And if it does, you'll just chat GPT it or whatever bot of choice is in vogue at that time, right? But the book is set up around formative and summative. So I want you to have these definitions straight. Ian? Oh, never mind.
Sorry, I unmuted myself.
No, you're good. Okay, thank you for kind of thinking that through. I think that'll be useful. Okay, you ready for a case study? We're gonna walk through a situation. And because I'm not very original and it was kind of late or kind of early or whatever, yesterday I went to my book club. I'm in a book club. No one's surprised. I went to this book club and it was at a pub. So I drove downtown and went to this pub I've never been to. And in Salt Lake City, Utah, you pay for parking via this Park Salt Lake app. So there's an app that you use to pay for parking, and all of the parking stuff through the city is all through this app. So I used it, I parked at the pub, and I attended my book club, and we had some great discussion. Thanks for asking. And everyone had a lot of kombucha and weird things. And then I went home, and now here we are. We're going to look at this app. So what I was thinking about is the Olympics the Winter Olympics were in Salt Lake City in 2002. I was just a kid. But the Olympics are coming again in 9 years. So this is a big deal for little old Salt Lake City. And I was just thinking about, like, as you do, as you're driving home, I was just thinking about like infrastructure and things that are going to be challenging for the city as a result of all the tourism, the traffic related to the Olympics. And then I was thinking about this parking app. Like, all these new people who have never used this app before are probably going to be using it. So that is now our case study today. We're going to be looking at the Park Salt Lake app. And for this, I actually need a volunteer to do a 2-minute or less remote usability test with me as the researcher. I'm the researcher, you're the participant. And don't worry, you can't fail. There's no possible way to fail here. I picked Smirity only because, Ian, you are always sacrificing yourself as the first person for everything. So Smirity and I will do this. Let me give you a little bit of instructions. So when you pull up to a parking lot, you see this sign. And then we'll walk through this, and then the app gets involved to pay for your parking. So see, I want you to imagine you and I are standing in a parking lot, and you just walked out of your car, and I'm like, hi, I'm a researcher, and I was wondering if you could answer a few questions for me today as you're paying for your parking. What would you do first when it comes to this parking situation? We have this sign in front of us. What might you do first?
I mean, I think seeing that I need my phone, like, pull up and like try and download the app first, because I'm assuming I won't have the app already downloaded.
Right.
So
Yeah, so Smirty's she fits my sampling criteria. She's never parked in Salt Lake City before, maybe for the purpose of this scenario. So you'll need to download the app. Okay, let's imagine you did that. So here's the app. And I am actually going to give you remote control of my screen. So you should see like a little notification.
mhm.
And then
Okay.
if you accept that, you should be able to control my screen.
Okay, I think I can control it.
Yes. So tell me what you're seeing here.
I think, yeah, so the next thing I'd probably do is see if I can see that sign, like a similar sign around me at that point,
Right.
to see, because it's asking for a zone number, so look for the zone that I'm in.
Let's imagine we see a sign and it says 801.
Okay, so then I'd probably click new session, and yeah, it's options. Yeah, that's probably, because if I can find the option, then I'd do that. Yeah.
And what would you do here?
Ooh, again, I'd probably look to see if there is an indication for the space number, like is it either on the sign or if it's on like next to the parking spot that I've taken, because I'm assuming this is the lot number that where I have parked.
Yeah, and let's imagine the spot you've parked in is labeled like on the pavement 1001.
Oh, yeah, so then yeah, just look for that first and then click that.
Great.
Okay, yeah. Scroll across. Okay, so I can't scroll, but yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
And let's just imagine you want to max out your parking.
yeah, so then I just click that, and I think then it flashed onto the continue to pay. So then I just proceed there, I think. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I'm assuming that I've already like put in my payment. I probably have to include it because it's the new download of the app, but like that's what I would do next, because looking at the price and everything, that's the next step I'd do.
Okay.
And then assuming I've done that, then I just click confirm payment. Yeah. Okay. So would I need like a screenshot of this or to like show people, or is there any way like that's probably the next question I'd have in my head, where like, is this all I need to do, or do I need to like put any indication on my car, include like my car information if possible? Like that's the next question I'd have.
Perfect.
All right.
Okay, I have one final question for you. So you're going to tell me a score, like a rating score on a scale of 1 to 7. And the question is, overall, how difficult or easy did you find this task? 1 would be very difficult and 7 would be very easy.
I think like 6 or 7, it was pretty easy, but then I think it's because I've also used apps like this before, so it was similar to other experiences I've had. So I would say, like either 6 or 7.
Okay, if you had to select between 6 or 7, which one would you pick?
I probably go 6. Sometimes it was like it took a minute to figure out what to put it, especially because in the number part, I was under the impression I had to type out the number versus the number being present over there. But other than that, I think, yeah, 6.
Great.
Fairly easy.
Okay. End test. Thank you for participating. I will take back control of the screen. Okay. So here we are. And sure enough, Smirty, she started by downloading the app, and then we looked for the sign, we looked for the spot, and I said, yeah, the max amount of time for 2 hours. And she intuited that the zone is on a sign, the spot's going to be labeled on a sign or on the bottom somehow. So this is the whole setup. And she was able to successfully complete the task. Although there was a little uncertainty at the end there, right? About what to do next and what's really needed and that sort of thing. So that was a very quick usability test. And back to our construct question, we asked Samaritan a lot of different things. Based on this test, like, how would you go about measuring usability? What would be your approach here?
Would time to complete be something you could measure?
You could. Yeah, you totally could.
Completion rate is the first thing that comes to my mind.
Okay, completion rate. Tell me about rate. What does that
Sorry,
mean?
percentage. Or
Percentage, what does that mean?
I guess I'm thinking of multiple participants, how many people were able to, yeah. But
Okay, just wanted to make sure I was following.
Oh.
Yeah, so the number of people who completed. Nick?
I think I'd kind of want to see how many taps it took for her to get to where she needed to be. And then I think the second thing I would measure is what you did at the end, like how satisfied they were, and what emotions were they experiencing as like they were going through the app. Like I think one thing is like I know I've used that app before where like I'm looking for the zone and I forget that there's like a parking spot. Like when I first used the app, I was like, oh, now I gotta walk all the way back to my parking spot and look for the number. Like I don't know. That would be an emotion that would trigger for me, you know.
I love that you bring that up. Yes, I bet that would occur. Sean, did you have a thought?
I know you love this one, but time on task.
Yeah, which I think Jack was sort of saying that too. Time to complete or time on task.
Yeah, so how long it takes them to do each page. To
Great.
Which, because they're trying to get through it quickly, probably.
Yeah.
So how confusing is each page, you know?
Yes.
I think the rating given was interesting at the end, because she said 6 or 7, but then when you kind of like pushed her, she went with 6. So I don't know if I would want to dig deeper into that, why she chose that one as opposed. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot you can kind of dig into with that too as well.
That's a great comment. And I'll ask Teresa to wrap this up, but I want to segue into what might you have done differently in that usability test? Be thinking about that. Teresa, do you have a thought?
Well, I also remember at the very beginning, you said, what would you do first? And I remember she said I would download the app, which was actually came second. So I was wondering, like, how would you collect data on the fact that she had to do the second step before the first in the app or on the sign, at least?
Right. Yeah, good catch. And did anyone else kind of notice that or yeah. So I think that is something we would want to document for every participant, and that starts to be like, how well are the instructions working? And are the instructions working well enough to get people through the experience? To Nick's point, like what if they weren't familiar with this paradigm, didn't read the sign, and then they had to, walk back to their parking spot to get that number, for example, or switched the numbers. So these are all things that could have occurred that we would want to document. What else might you have done differently if you'd been if this were a perfect usability test? What sorts of things might you have tried or asked about or changed? Anything you noticed that could be improved? Serena?
I noticed, I don't know if you gave Smriti these directions, but she's sort of kind of saying I think she's automatically saying her thoughts out loud, but I think it could have been better if you just said, can you also tell me how you're feeling when you're doing this instead of just telling me the action that you're doing, because I can also see the action that you're doing. You're trying to find this, but I would like to know how you're feeling when you're going about doing this action. Like Smriti was like, okay, I'm scrolling. It doesn't scroll. It could have been like, can you elaborate a little bit more? How do you feel when it doesn't scroll for you? Or why didn't this work for you?
Yes, Narity was a perfect participant. She was automatically giving me her rationale out loud. She was asking questions, but when I didn't provide an answer to a question, she would just kind of state her assumption or she'd move forward in the task. Perfect participant. I wish they were all like Smirty. Any other thoughts about what could be improved or changed? Yes. Did anyone notice on my prototype when she clicked things, the blue flash?
Yeah, maybe put in the working keyboard instead of the recommended buttons.
Yeah, so this is a Figma thing. When you make a prototype in Figma, you essentially, I'll actually go back to it. You essentially create these clickable zones. And if someone clicks the wrong place, those zones will remind you what's actually clickable. And this often skews participants when it comes to misclicks. And this is why it's so important to be watching them, because if they said, oh, okay, I'll just start a new session, and then maybe they clicked here, or maybe this wasn't clickable and they clicked up here, and then that blue flash happened and then they clicked here, that's not a successful first click. So watching people very closely is really important. I can't remember. I think you can turn off those blue cues so that they don't bias your participant. But one thing that you can do if you're doing more of a qualitative usability test is just to say, like, tell me where you would click, and then I'll let you know that we can go ahead and click there. So having them verbally tell you where they would go and then have them go there is a good way to mitigate some of that. But I wanted to call that out for you because almost all of you are going to be using a Figma prototype. Some of you might be using the actual live environment if there's something you're testing that's important for people to like type in fields and you don't want to do all of that in Figma, but something to note. Okay, so there are lots of ways we could measure usability in this test. Success or failure, right? If Smirty hadn't been a very good participant and she had just clicked through the experience and either succeeded or failed, and I had been silent the whole time, we would still have that data point. Without all of the rich qualitative data she gave us, we would still have success or failure on the task. I asked that item, the rating scale item at the end. We could just use that. We could use, to the point of the book talking about triangulation, we could use both of those things. We could use success failure and then also the usability score rating. We could also go through the transcript of the interaction that Smirty and I had and code whether she was expressing confusion, positive or negative feelings, and we could score that. We could say she was confused 3 times, or she misclicked 3 times, or expressed uncertainty this many times. So do you see like the construct of usability, all these different ways we could tap into it? And we might choose all of them if it's a high risk project. We might look at every single one of those measures I just described. Or if we had to do this in a day and stand in a parking lot and get people to do this, we might just go with success failure. 9 out of 10 succeeded. And that might be the finding of the day. We go back, we report. So when you're thinking about your final project, I want you to think about all of these different approaches are valid. For the final project, you do have to quantify one thing, and you have to either give me a confidence interval or run a statistical test on it. So it has to be one quantifiable thing, but everything I just described was quantifiable. Even the qualitative comments are quantifiable. I could count them. Okay, so we talked a little bit about the approach there. Let's imagine, there are a few ways we talked about, like standard ways of quantifying things. Success, failure, yes, no, complete, incomplete, rating scale, like the one I got at the end. And of course, Dani's very favorite, time on task. Just kidding, that's a joke. Some of you are getting it and some of you remember how I hate this one. I don't hate it. There's a time and a place. And to people's points, we do want people to be able to complete this task quickly. Because I don't know about you, but I don't usually get places super early. So if I'm like running to an appointment or trying to make it into something and I need to pay for parking, it shouldn't take me more than 5 minutes to do this. But see what I just did there? It's really useful when you can set the bar of this should not take people more than 5 minutes. That is success. Completion in less than 5 minutes. That's when time on task becomes really useful. Elizabeth has a great question in the chat. How do you keep track of all this? both the qual and the quant data. And what I recommend to you is record everything. So one way we could have recorded things is if the mobile device that maybe I have in the parking lot, maybe I have them use my test device and it's just recording the whole time. It's recording the screen, it's recording audio. I have worn pretty much like a GoPro around my neck and recorded interactions in the field. T and I did this on Zoom, so that was recorded. Nice. The other thing, if you can't record, you want to have two people and one person is taking notes really frantically and the other person's kind of leading the test. If you have to do this solo, then I usually come up with a coding system for myself. So that means I will lay out the different pieces of the test, like each screen. I might even have the screens printed off on pieces of paper. And then I am like writing on the screen what she did. And then if there's any quotes, I put them in quotation marks so I know it was a direct quote from her, or I'll just summarize and say, no problems on this screen, or minor confusion on this screen. So that's what all of those things can look like. For the purpose of your final project, I recommend recording everything. Just use a tool like Zoom and record all of your sessions. But if you can't do that, then you'll take notes. Great question. Okay, so common paradigms here. We have success, failure, rating scale, time on task. If this is looking awful familiar, is because chapter 3 goes through everything in this order. Talks about success, failure, completion, incomplete, any binary outcomes. Then it talks about continuous, and then it talks about time on task and positive skew. So for this test, let's imagine we just went with success, failure. So imagine I had to do this pretty quickly and, Salt Lake City just wants to know, is this working? Is this going to work for the Olympics? And I need to report on that. So I go out to a parking lot and I find, in this case, 14 people who are brand new, have never used the app before. So they meet my participant criteria and they go through and this is just, did they complete paying for parking? Yes or no? So I have 3 no's and a bunch of yeses, and then I have a yes with a little asterisk because this is real life data. This is what happens in real life. So if Smriti got through the entire experience and then said, did I actually submit the payment? Do I still need to go to the kiosk? And then I said, I don't know, what would you do if I wasn't here? I think I'd go over to the kiosk. Her uncertainty, if that had been the case, if she would have taken an action, like if she says, I think I would try to start the session again. I think I would try to do this again. That could be a success or it could be a failure in your book. I'm curious, who would rate that as a success or failure? Would you rate that situation as a success or a failure as a researcher? Any thoughts? Success, fail, fail.
Failure.
Success, fail, fail, fail. Not sure. Okay. I'm seeing some people erring on the side of failure. In that case, I'd probably code it as a failure because our participant would double pay for parking. And I think that's probably something I would say, yeah, the app would need to be improved if we have participants who are double paying for parking because they don't know that they did pay for parking. Now, in a different situation, I might make a completely different judgment call. But for the sake of this example, let's say I'm the senior researcher and I override and we're going to call that a no. We're going to call that a failure. So that means we have 10 out of 14 users who succeeded. 10 out of 14 people. So we get back to the office. Turns out the board is there waiting for us. All of the leadership team. Everyone's at the long table waiting for us. And we go, hey everyone, 10 out of 14 users succeeded in paying for parking. I'll take my paycheck, thank you very much. All in a good day's research, right? Right, this happens all the time. Companies make huge multi-million-dollar decisions off of exactly what I just said. And sometimes that's okay. Sometimes there's not a whole lot of risk to the situation. 10 out of 14 users, I don't know, CEO says, that sounds good to me. 10 out of 14. Okay, but we're researchers, right? So we're actually going to say 71% of users succeeded. Of brand new users succeeded in the task. Yeah, we're going to give them a percentage. 71%. 10 out of 14. Okay, great. No. We're good researchers. So we're actually going to really have them focus on the risk here. So we're going to say 29% of you new users failed the task. Walk into the room, 29% of users today failed the task. Okay, now we're talking. Now people don't feel so good about that result. Okay, so then we ask, like, is that okay? Are we okay with the app being at this level of failure? And then some discussion starts. So again, all in a good day's research. You did it, you're exhausted, but of course it's not over, right? Because it's never over, and you'll always get this question. But Dani, you only tested with 14 people, 6 people, 3 people, whatever it is. You only tested with 14 people today. You stood in a parking lot for 6 hours and you only tested with 14 people. And you say 29% failure rate? How do you know? How do you know the results are actually going to translate to the real world? How do you know that 29% of users everywhere? What parking lot were you standing in? Well, I actually randomly sampled 3 parking lots across the city. Okay, well, which ones were they? And what time of day? And what people did you talk to? And what were their demographics? And how do you know? And how do you know? It's such a small sample size. Okay, all valid. I know, right? You see what's coming. But like all valid questions. So we might talk about, well, I did what I could to make sure the sample was representative of the population. Or maybe we say this was a convenience sample and we can't be sure that this sample is representative of the population. These are valid conversations to be having with the stakeholders. But let's say it really just boils down to 14. It was only 14 people. How do we know? How does the Olympics rest on 14 people? These parking people are really passionate about what they do. How is this all going to just rest on 14 people? So let's calculate a confidence interval. That'll save the day, right? Serena called it in the chat. Let's do it. Let's calculate a confidence interval just like the book said we should. So how do we do that? How do we do that? And the book walks you through the walled interval. And at the very end, once you think you know the walled interval, it's like, just kidding, for small sample sizes, you should do the adjusted walled, right? Okay, so we have these 2 concepts. We have the walled interval is the stat we're running. And then we have this suggested adjustment for small sample sizes, which in UX, you will almost always have fewer than 30 participants on a usability test. So you're almost always going to make the adjustment. So we're going to walk through the adjusted walled. And the adjustment for the walled statistic that we're going to run is simplified to, you can just add 2 successes and 2 failures to your data set. These are made up participants, and we're just going to add 2 successes and 2 failures. The book goes into why, it's actually 1.92, it comes from the distribution. But to simplify it all, the adjustment is add 2 successes and 2 failures. Okay, so our success rate was 10 out of 14. Our failure rate was 4 out of 14. We had a total of 14 users, 71% success, 29% failure. We chose to report to our stakeholders the failure rate because we were trying to call out the risk. N equals 14. When we bippity boppity boop and we make this walled adjustment, we just add 2 successes and 2 failures to our data set. These are made up people that we're adding to our data set. So now we have 12 successes, 6 failures, and a hypothetical total of 18 users. And these are the numbers you're going to plug into the walled statistic calculation. And you'll notice it changed slightly our success and failure rates, right? We went from 71 to 67. We went from 29 to 33. We now have a sample size of 18. And this is just to stabilize our sample to plug into this test. Okay, so whether we understand completely why we're doing the adjustment or not, book goes into some detail. You could totally have a conversation with ChatGPT about this over some tea. ChatGPT, tell me about the walled adjustment. But for today, we're just going to move forward with this procedure because most of you on your final project are going to be making this adjustment. So let's do it. We're going to calculate the margin of error. What is the margin of error? Can anyone tell me?
I
Anyone
thought
recall?
of it as
Go for it. Yeah.
I thought of it as like standard error a little bit, where it's like how far away they are from what we estimated or predicted.
Yes. So
For our
standard
samples.
error is a part of the margin of error calculation. And Serena's right. It's the distance. So whenever you're reporting a confidence interval, you could always say it's 10 plus or minus 2. The plus or minus 2 is the margin of error. And to get your confidence interval, you would plus and minus 2 from 10. So it would be from 8 to 12 is your confidence interval. So margin of error is just a way of kind of saying like that's that distance in your confidence interval. But to Serena's point, we have this thing called standard error, and that's what we need to calculate to find our margin of error, that number, that interval. So how confident do we want to be? What level of confidence do we want to have when we're reporting to our stakeholders? Anyone have strong feelings about confidence level?
Or is it going to be 95%?
Yeah, we always do 95%. So why not? And you know, it's a good rule of thumb. People like hearing 95% confident. I've done 90 sometimes. I've even done 80 one time. It just depends on your research question. But a good rule of thumb is just always go with 95% confidence interval, confidence level for creating your intervals and running your stats. That's what the book walks you through. So let's do it. 95% confidence. Okay, so 95% confidence translates to a number on the Z distribution. And you've seen those lookup tables before, or you can Google this number. So if we want to be 95% confident, the critical Z value is 1.96. That's the number that equals 95% confident for this walled interval. So we can look that up on a table. We can look that up on Google. If I want to be 95% confident, what is the critical Z value? And it will tell us 1.96. And you will memorize that number as a quant person. 1.96. Okay, so now I'll show you the nice formula that we're going to plug into. Ah, spooky! Formulas suck. How many of you have this reaction when you see a formula? Yeah. Right? I know. Gori, you said it in the online discussion. I feel you. Okay, I was watching myself give this lecture 2 years ago to make it better this time. And I realized I spooked everyone with the formula like way too soon. And then everyone just shut down. Like it was bad. It was really bad. So formulas are spooky. They really are. But we're going to walk through it. The book keeps walking you through formulas. This is going to be a part of your life for the remainder of this course. Reading this book is formulas. So we're going to just step through each piece. And what's great these days is if you don't understand the formula, you know, you can come to office hours. We can talk about it. But you can always ask your favorite chatbot friend to explain the formula to you, because the book sometimes doesn't do a super good job. But ChatGPT is really good about breaking down each section of a formula, at least for the stats that we're covering in this class, because I made sure it was to recommend it to you. Okay, so spooky formula monster comes out, and here it is. Gosh, it doesn't look great. It doesn't look great, folks. But let's really look at what it's saying. So first thing is p hat, proportion. I actually kind of hate the word proportion because we usually use the word percentage, like the percentage of people in the population, not the proportion of people. And then we have another weird P word, just like mixing in all the stats, probability, right? And they all have like these overlapping meanings: proportion, percentage, probability. Our proportion is the number of the percentage of people who succeeded or the percentage of people who failed, whichever way we want to spin this. So it doesn't matter which one you plug in, as long as you're consistent. And we decided that failures are a more interesting thing to report on than successes. That's almost always true because people want to know the risk, right? 29% failed. How true is 29%? So that's what we're going to plug in. We're going to plug in 29%. But wait, we made an adjustment. Remember how we just made up that data? The 4 people plus and minus 2 successes, 2 failures. So we have to account for that when we're plugging in the numbers to the formula, which means our new proportion of failures was 33%. And that's our p hat. That's a 0. Maybe I should have typed that. Sometimes I get really happy with the pen. So a 33% is our p hat. So we're going to plug in 0.33 to all of these. Then we have our critical Z value, which, just to mess with you, is this entire thing here. And we decided, because we Googled it, 95% confidence, 1.96. Y'all, we're almost done. There's only one number that is missing here, and it's N. And we love N. We know N. Our sample size is our adjusted sample size. So that's the trick with Wald's adjustment. It's 18 people. Even though we only met with 14 people, we added 2 successes and 2 failures. So our N is now 18. So we would plug that all in. Sample size, the adjusted version, and then we'd subtract multiply, take the square root, divide, take the square root. Okay, so if you wanted to do that in Excel or Google Sheets, you could do this, and you can reference these slides later. The function in Excel or Google Sheets likes you to say, I'm multiplying square. I'm taking the square root and multiplying. Yeah, it wants all the, ignore what I just said, folks. It wants all of the multiplication symbols. So where did I go wrong? I don't know, but it wants all of them. So you can't just 1.96 parentheses. In Google Sheets, it wants the multiplication symbols. And that's how we'll calculate our margin of error. So we'll either calculate it, like I could just pull up a calculator and do what I just said, subtract 0.33, multiplied by 0.33, divided by 18, take the square root. I could do that with a calculator if I wanted to. Ian?
So that works in both Excel and Google Sheets. It's just Google Sheets wants the multiplication, or is that what it is?
Yeah, I think Excel is fine without that little, this will work in both. Yeah. So I think what I did one time is like this action. Yeah. And for some reason, Sheets hates that. And it's like, what? You're doing this, but we're doing this. So how do you, or like maybe some of you are used to this where it would be 0.33 times the result of what's in the parentheses, but you didn't put the multiplication symbol. So it wants all of those like this.
Thank you.
Good question. Okay, so you just saw the answer because I just plugged it in. So it's 0.21, right? I think I rounded. 0.22. 0.22 is the margin of error, which means this is our percentage of failures plus or minus 0.22 equals our confidence interval. Said another way, why do I keep using the pen? I should just type it. It's between, our confidence interval is between 11% and 55% failure rate. Thoughts, questions? I don't get it.
Yeah, I had a
Nick.
question, Danny. Oh, sorry.
Oh.
When you're entering this into a calculator, right? Why wouldn't we, according to the formula you have, be adjusted, right? Why wouldn't it be 0.33 plus or minus 1.96 times, and then whatever's in the radical after that?
It
Like,
is. It's just trying to confuse you.
oh,
So
okay.
the formula itself, so we have 0.33 plus or minus, and then everything after that is how we calculate the margin of error. So this formula simplifies to this statement, 0.33 plus or minus 0.22 is everything to
Okay.
the left
I
of the
see. I
brackets.
see what you're saying. Okay. And when we're determining plus or minus, like, what does that mean? Like,
That means if I add 0.33, so our value from this side of the equation was 0.22. 0.33 plus 0.22 is 55%, and
uh-huh.
0.33 minus is 11%.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, great.
I got it. Thank you.
Okay, so we did it. So we come back and we say, I'm 95% confident that the true failure rate in the population will be between 11% and 55% if we run the same statistic again in the future with a representative sample. Nailed it, right? Totally nailed it. Ian, why are you shaking your head? This is my moment.
I hate how wide that range is. It irritates me. I would have walked out the meeting room.
Yeah. So, everything I just said was accurate in terms of statistics, right? And some of you even called this out. It's actually like the confidence interval is for the stat given the population if we reran the stat on a similar blah, 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 right? But if you say this, you're not going to make friends. I don't know why. I've never figured it out. Maybe you'll figure it out and tell me. But you won't make friends if you say it that way. So walking into a better way to say it to your stakeholders is you want to simplify everything. And what do your stakeholders really care about is how many people are going to fail to pay for parking, which is why we told them originally that whole 29% are going to fail. That's how many failed in our test. So you might say, I'm 95% confident that the failure rate is going to be between 11 and 55%. And they will say, okay. Or you could say, I'm 95% confident that at least 11% of people will fail. I'm taking the minimum, the lower bound of the confidence interval, because according to our stat, at least 11% are going to fail if my sample was representative of the population. So that's typically how you report out on these things. You take either the lower bound or the upper bound of your confidence interval, because that's like simplifying it and such is how you sort of communicate risk in these situations. Okay, gonna pause here. Any like burning questions or comments on this process? Great. Then it's time to take a break. You earned it. We'll come back in 15 minutes. So I have 10:12. Let's come back at 10:27. Thanks. Welcome back. Any thoughts or questions that occurred to you during the break? One thing I was kind of thinking about is like, we'll talk more about this. Where's my handy dandy pen here? We'll talk more about this, but when starting a usability test, I often ask myself, it's kind of like a decision tree I go through of when I report out, am I going to be estimating something or am I going to be comparing something? Estimating or comparing. So when I tell the long table, am I going to say at least 11% of people will fail? I'm giving them an estimation. Or am I saying choose design A over design B, or design B, or the design usability score has decreased since last quarter? Am I comparing two things? So far in the book, chapter 3 was all about estimating, but we're going to walk slowly into comparing two things, which is actually usually more comfortable for people because I think in the 308 series in the UX program, folks usually have more practice comparing two things. Are these statistically different versus just reporting out those estimations using confidence intervals? I hope you're starting to see how what we just did is useful. So we did success failure, right? And we ended up saying at least 11% of people are going to fail. We're 95% confident. But you don't have to use success failure. If you were doing a task, if we were walking through that app and let's say 3 people swapped their parking spot for their zone number. This is kind of to Teresa's point earlier, is like all of these different things we saw, would we want to write them down and how would we handle that data? So let's imagine 3 of our participants swapped the parking spot and the zone number. Now we have a proportion, 3 out of 14, and we can do the same thing we just did to estimate the true number of people who are going to make that error. So it'll be less than 11% because we just did that for, you know, it was 4 out of 14 and we added 2 successes and 2 failures and all of that. But we could actually estimate that confidence interval for any behavior, anything that's a proportion. If it's 60% of people did this, 10% of people said that, whatever error you're tracking, if people fall into one of 2 categories and you can say it as a percentage, then you can run this test on it. And then you can report back that confidence interval and use the upper or the lower bound to help your stakeholders understand the risk. So a lot of you are going to do your usability tests, and 10 out of 10 people you test are going to succeed at the task. But did 2 of them make the same comment? And do you want to estimate what the true prevalence of that comment would be? Assuming your sample size is representative and all that, you could report on that stuff too. Does that make sense? 2 of you are nodding, so it's just encouraging me. I know, right? Like once I unlocked that I could quantify any behavior, anything that I could report as a percentage of people, I could use confidence intervals and get really specific about quantifying risk. This was my superpower after that. So it really makes small sample size tests in UX a lot more, I don't know, they hold more weight now because you're not just saying 2 out of 10, you're saying 2 out of 10 in our sample. And when we estimate how that translates out into the real world, we're talking 8% of people are going to have some catastrophic failure. And that everyone starts to listen when you say things like that. Okay. So if I were you and I forgot all this, completely forgot my cute little monster, forgot this whole lecture 4 weeks from now, and I'm frantically trying to do my final project, I would just pull up this lecture. And as long as you're reporting on a proportion of some kind, this is how you quantify that proportion. And I would just walk through the steps that we just walked through. with your data. And then you write that. And then you put that in your slides, and then you get, 20 out of 20 points on that section of the final project. So remember, you can always go back and reference the recordings, and listening to me on double speed is so much nicer than listening to me on single speed. But here we are, live. Okay, so that's point estimation. How many of you are probably going to use Excel or Google Sheets as much as you can? Yeah, it's usually about 70% of the class prefers Excel and Sheets. If you have prior experience with Excel and Excel functions, a lot of students are just faster at this stuff in Excel or Google Sheets. So I gave you the Excel formula. Anyone gonna try to use R? 1, 2, 3. Okay, you might challenge yourself to use R. I encourage a lot of students who want to challenge themselves to get better at R, do it in R, then do it in Excel. See if you get the same answer. That was then, this is now. Maybe do it in R, do it in ChatGPT, see if you get the same answer. So you can do all of these things. And there are a bunch of online calculators as well that are just running these same functions and formulas on the back end anyway. So you can cross-reference as much as you want to be really confident in your results. And I kid you not, when I am going to present out a finding that is, game-changing for a business, you better believe I run it in R and Excel and every online calculator I can find. And I run different stats to make sure that it holds up in every which way. So please do that. I think it helps you understand things better when you see it in different contexts. For those of you who are going to try R, I think, we'll do that in a second. I think you all use the psych package in stats, psych library. At least when someone shared, I don't know, they came to office hours and we were talking about their stats assignment. They pulled up their R script and I was like, oh, you all are using the psych library. So I just gave you, there is a walled function, a binomial walled interval function in the psych library. It's called binom walled. Warning, I should have put a big warning on this. Warning, that's just the walled interval. So if you are adjusting for small sample size, you'll need to do that manually, then plug in the values, which are super easy, by the way. The parameters that this function in R accepts are the count, the number of people. So in our adjusted, we had 4 people fail in real life. Then we added 2 failures, added 2 successes. So we ended up having 6 people who failed out of our new adjusted sample size of 18. And then you plug in the confidence level that you're seeking, which is 0.95 in this case, 95% confidence. And it will spit out the margin of error and I think the lower bound and the upper bound of the confidence interval. So if you want to do this in R, here it is. If you have not installed this package, run this command. Make sure you load your library and then make sure you adjust your sample size if you're going to make the adjustment. Which brings me to that question. What would we do if our sample size was 35? What if we got 35 people in the parking lot that day? Any takers? Ian?
Would you just do walled? I don't think you would do exact yet, but just walled.
Yeah, you would just calculate the walled interval. So we wouldn't add 2 successes or 2 failures. We would just plug everything into the formula. Yep, great. Here's one. Was this a formative or a summative test? Nick, do you want to take a stab? Feel free to stamp, of course. Like I thought y'all would stamp, but then Nick raised his hand.
Yeah, no, I can stamp.
All right, stamp away. Or if anyone wants to talk it out, because I'm seeing a lot of I don't actually know faces on you. Okay, we were about an even split at first, but it looks like summative is starting to win. So it's true, this would be summative. We're saying overall in this experience, we predict between 11 and 55% failure on the experience. We're not generating a list of problems to fix. We're not telling stakeholders ways to redesign this experience. We're just saying this is the failure rate. It's this overall summative score, essentially, that we're reporting out. And why is that interesting? Well, if we wanted to compare 2 designs, then we might do success and failure on each design of the parking app. And then if those confidence intervals overlap, there's no significant difference. And if the confidence intervals don't overlap, then there is a significant difference. We'll get into that in a couple chapters. Okay, so the example I just gave you is summative but most of you are still going to give me formative in your final project. You might report that like failure rate or something as your quantified, kind of quantified variable or quantified outcome, in which case you're kind of doing both. Yeah, I don't like the summative and formative, and it's hard. And everyone's like, yeah, we get it, Dani. But then I do this and I keep showing you this stupid slide, and everyone's like, oh, I don't know. I still don't know. Which I think is why people in the real world don't use these terms, because they're just kind of hard to think about, and like the difference between the two gets really squishy. So if it's pretty much a score, it's summative. Finding and fixing a list, that's formative. Okay, great. So let's imagine we're back. We rewind time, and instead of success fail, we actually want to know based on that final score. So I asked Smriti that scale of 1 to 7 overall, how difficult or easy was this experience? Was this task to complete for you, or whatever that specific question is? And let's say we got those scores, and that's actually what we want to report out. Or maybe we got them in addition to success and failure, and we want to report both of those things. So now we're using rating scale data, continuous, not binary, but we'd like to run some stats on it. We talked about this last time, that there are standardized usability questionnaires. So don't reinvent the wheel, just ask one of the standardized items. And I listed them out here. In the book, Jeff Sorrow and Jim Lewis talk a lot about the super Q. Honestly, like, ha. No one uses this, but these guys developed this scale. That's why they talk about it so much in the book. So the super Q, it's a good scale because it's not just usability. It's usability, trust, appearance, and loyalty. If you use it in your final project, I will be very pleased if you capture all of those things, because yeah, that's often what stakeholders want to know. So great. But if we're just talking about usability, typically it's the SEQ, the single ease question. And that's the question I asked Smriti. Overall, how easy or difficult? Overall, how easy or difficult did you find the task? And I'm reading it because that exact wording is the item. No variation. You cannot change the wording and still call it the SEQ. So that's the single ease question, very common. And it's common because I can do it verbally. It's one item. It doesn't take a lot of time. And the other most common is the UX, which was an iteration of the sus to make it shorter. Just 4 items. Here they are. You can reference these later. You can Google them. You can GPT them. So let's imagine we have 9 users, not 14 anymore, but we just got 9 users. Here they are and their SEQ scores. Same task. How difficult or easy was this task to complete? And we'll even imagine, for the sake of this test, that everyone completed. Everyone was able to complete their purchase. Everyone went through the flow and paid for parking. And then we got these scores. So one really common thing that people do is the average of the scores was 5.56 out of 7. You'll see that all the time in the world. People just report the average, report the mean. If they're feeling fancy, they'll report the median. But you'll see that a lot. 5.56 out of 7. And then we'll get the same question, right? But you only tested with 9 people. How do you know that the real score is 5.56 out of 7? It's only 9 people. We have more people at this table. We have more people at this table almost that look kind of like Steve Carell. Okay, so how do we compute a confidence interval for continuous data? That's when we go to the T confidence interval. And we're using the T distribution just like you use in t-tests. And to do that, we're going to calculate the standard error and then calculate the margin of error. So we're going to take the standard deviation of our sample, which you can do just in Excel. You can type in STDEV, standard deviation, and then you'll select that data set, right? Those 9 items. And remember, standard deviation is the variance among these items, average variance. And then we'll divide it by the square root of the sample size. Our sample size was 9. Then we look up the t value. Remember last time we looked up the z value and that value was 1.96. T is different. If you recall, t values are based on sample size. So we can't just memorize a fancy number like 1.96 like we can with the z distribution. So we have to look up the t value given the sample size. And it's going to ask for the confidence, which let's keep it at 95%. And then it's going to ask for the degrees of freedom. which thankfully in this case is just n minus 1. Our sample size was 9, our degrees of freedom is 8. So we plug in 8 and 95% confidence interval, a 95% confidence level into Google if you want. Like I bet you could type that into Google and it will do a really good job telling you what the t-value is. Or you can use this Excel function. So I have, in this case, it takes alpha, which is the error rate, 95%, so 5%. And then your degrees of freedom is 8. Degrees of freedom, which is n minus 1. Or just Google it. And if we Googled it, we'd get 2.306. That's the t-value. So we want to solve for this side of the equation here. And we did that. The t-value, 2.3 approximately, and the standard error, which is the standard deviation divided by the square root of n. I think the standard deviation was like 1 point something. Our mean was 5.56, I think I said. And I think the standard deviation is 1 point, 1 point I forget. Okay, so that will give us the margin of error. Pulling up the data set so I can quickly look at what the standard deviation was. Okay, it's 1.24 is the standard deviation of our data set. Great. So all we do is multiply the standard error by the t-value, and that's our margin of error. Questions on this? Okay, so if we did that, multiplied out, so that was our t-value that we looked up, multiply to get your margin of error, and then create your interval. So our margin of error was 2.81 when we multiply t by standard error. So our confidence interval is 2.75 to 8.37. Great. So we come back and we say the average usability score. I'm 95% confident that the average usability rating in the population is between 2.75 and 8.37. And Ian hates me again, as he should. Just like that, the guy hates me. And look, we even cleaned it up. It's between 3 and 7, because if you recall, our rating scale doesn't go to 8. It goes to 7. Okay, so we'll clean that up. We're researchers after all. It's between 3 and 7 in the population. Heck, we'll even go a little bit further. Take the lower bound, make cognitive load super light on these folks. I'm 95% confident that the average usability rating is at least 3. I don't understand. I thought you said the average was 6. Why are you saying the usability score is at least 3? That's a huge difference. I don't like you anymore. You're not fired, but you should go think about what you've done and come back. So if you noticed, on our continuous data in this example, our confidence interval is freaking huge. We have a 7-point Likert scale. Our confidence interval is, well, people in the population will average between 3 and 7. Okay, so bad and awesome? What does this tell us? Tells us nothing, right? It's tricky. So what do we say? What might you say? Or what would you like to say? I mean, how would you like to come back and talk to them about this? Any thoughts? Should look at the chat.
I mean, you can also say, within our sample size, it seems like most of the users could be relatively familiar with this, but if we were to expand this out to the general public, we do have to factor in that there's different people driving and different experience with technology. So you will have a difference in the score, and 3 is not technically the average. It was just a lower bound of our confidence interval. That was the question I had earlier, like why did we choose to report the 3 in the lower bound and not the upper bound?
Because in this case, it is at least 3. The average is at least 3 up to 7. So saying that in the population, if we take the upper bound and we report on it the same way, in the population, the average usability score could be up to 7 out of 7. Ship it. It doesn't communicate any risk, but we know there's risk there because the actual data we got said that the true value could be between 3 and 7. That's a huge difference. If everyone's saying 3 out of 7, that's bad, right? So that's why I take the lower bound in a lot of cases. Ian, do you have a thought?
I was just going to say, if, was it 9 users total?
Mhm.
8 users out of 9 actually scored 5 and above. So if we looked at the data without the 3, we'd actually get these results as well. So it could be something to look at, but, you know, just because one out of 9 people it actually significantly lowered average or threshold.
Yeah, so you might have a conversation like that. It's 9 people. Only one of them seemed to give us a low score out of those 9. And then they're going to say, okay, well, how does that translate to our whole user base? And then you might say, well, average usability score will be at least 3, 95% sure. And they'll say, okay, seems like you're sick. Go home for the day and come back when you have things to tell us. It's a really tricky thing. Sean mentions in the chat, we need more data, right? We need more data. And that's a fine thing to talk about here. So sometimes with a small sample size and a low risk project, I'm going to take Ian's approach. I might just report the mean or the median. I'll report the proportion of people. Like if so many people said 7 out of 7 or 6 out of 7, might report all those proportions and then say, you know, this is 9 people though. So if we're trying to estimate what the general user base will do based on 9 people, well, I can tell you the average score is going to be between 3 and 7, somewhere between 3 and 7. So really low chance it's going to be 2 or 1. You're welcome. But to shrink that confidence interval so that we can say it's going to be between 6 and 7 or 5 and 6, to shrink that confidence interval, we need more data. And in the chapters you'll be reading, we're going to start to talk about how would you know what sample size to request. So if they say 3 isn't good, you might come back to them and say, what is a good score? Steve Carell, what is a good score? What score would you be really happy with? Well, we'd like an average score of like, I don't know, 5 out of 7. Okay, so now my goal is to be really confident that we're either sort of trending above or below 5 out of 7. And that's kind of a different approach, which will be covered in the coming chapters. And I might say, to get a really precise estimate, more precise than between 3 and 7, if I want to get more precise, I'm going to need X number of users. And we will calculate that number as well. So if we want to say like within 1 point, I want to be able to be that precise. I want to say it's between a 6 and a 7 or a 5 and a 6 or a 4 and a 3, just 1 point. That's how precise I want to be. Then we can calculate what sample size we'll need. So that's how that conversation would probably play out. But depending on your data, it starts to get a little bit difficult to derive actionable findings. Interesting, relevant findings we can use to make a decision. And in this case, we couldn't really make a very confident decision. You could also change your confidence. Maybe we don't need to be 95% confident. Maybe we only need to be 90% confident. Then we'll shrink our confidence interval, and that will help us understand where we're sitting. But yeah, a couple different ways to do that. So this isn't the answer you wanted to hear, but this happens all the time. So I wanted to warn you before you get into this situation, what this kind of conversation might look like, and then what actions you might take as a result of it. Does anyone have any other thoughts? Okay, if you're using R, you can plug in your data and run the t.test function. Time on task, I don't like, so we're going to spend about 60 seconds on it. Time on task is valid sometimes. The problem with time on task is what your book brought up. When calculating confidence intervals for time on task, your data is going to be skewed almost all the time. And it's almost always going to be positively skewed. Does anyone remember what we do when we have skewed data? Serena?
Report the medium.
Yeah.
Oh, that wasn't the answer.
I mean, it's better than the mean, right? It'll be more representative to take the median than the mean, which is being pulled by this tail. Other thoughts on skewedness? Mark?
I mean, it's situationally dependent, but you either want to remove or like kind of change the range restriction that you're dealing with.
Yes. To Mark's point, we want a normal distribution. That's not very normal, but you get it. We want a normal distribution as much as possible. So sometimes we can say, okay, there's only one data point out here that's pulling this tail. So we're just going to omit that outlier. But everybody else falls into a roughly normal distribution. It's a valid approach. Another approach is to transform your data. So transforming your data by taking the log, for example, of your data will produce a normal distribution. Yep, now we're into geometric mean and all of that fun stuff. So your book walks through these steps pretty carefully, and I'm happy to go through this with anyone who wants to join me in office hours and talk about time on task. But essentially, you want to transform your data by creating your same data set only. In this case, because it's a positive skew, we would logarithmically transform our data. And then we'd plug in all those values to the same formula that we just saw, the T confidence interval formula. So just to show you a little bit, I might have time on task. I always convert my time on task to seconds, unless it's like greater than, I don't know, 60 minutes of task time. And then I don't know what differences you're actually looking for there, but then I might keep it at minutes and decimals of minutes, but almost always it's going to be seconds. So you want to convert it to seconds or whatever makes sense. And then you'll have some kind of positive skew to your data. Very, very common. I've actually never captured time on task where I didn't have an extreme positive skew. And I think most researchers would almost use the word always when talking about this. So we have that positive skew, and then we would plug it into our formula. What's cool about this is you're just taking the log of your data and then you're plugging that into the formula. So these two formulas are the same guy. This one just has cute glasses on. So you'll notice it's just the log of the mean value, or the log of your mean of your values, and the log standard deviation. So let's just say, here's my data. Yellow's not great. What am I doing? I just wanted the glasses to show up on the guy. But let's just say I have my data. This person took 1 second. This person took 3 seconds. This person took 3 seconds. Then I'm going to transform them all to their logarithmic values, which might be like weird things. You'll take the log, and then you'll take the mean of this and the standard deviation of this new data set. I don't know that these are the actual natural logs of those numbers. I was just estimating in my head. But they might look really weird, and that's okay. And then you have to transform backward to get readable values. Again, if this comes up for you, the book walks through this in detailed steps, but does anyone have any questions or burning questions on positively skewed data?
I'm sorry, this may be dumb, but by log, you mean the frequency of...
And your audio's super quiet for me.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
It's still very quiet.
I'll just write then.
Okay, you could shout, or I mean, okay, as long as you don't mind me this close to my speakers, then I can probably get it.
Is the log just the frequency of each number?
No, the log is the reverse of an exponentiation of the number. We don't need to talk about that today. But when you're talking about transforming data, you could do anything to it. So like if you added 10 to every number, that's a transform of your data, as long as you do it to every single number. The reason we have to do the log of data in this case is because the log reduces the distance for those numbers that are out on the tail. So as you increment through, as you have increasing increments, the distance between them gets smaller. Yay. Yes. So maybe we'll cover, I think we have a positive, like we have skewed data in an upcoming like continuous situation, in which case we'll dive into this a little bit more detailed, because I do want you all to be able to run time on task data. Occasionally survey data, especially NPS, tends to be positively skewed. So it's a useful thing to know. But essentially, you're going to take your data, you're going to do the same thing to every data point to create new numbers, and then you're going to run the same stats on the new numbers. It's kind of like the walled adjustment where we just add 2 successes and 2 failures. We're just logging every single data point in our data set. Okay, well, I think I created more problems talking about that than I solved for you in your minds. But that's going to have to be okay today, because I would really rather you all do this activity for 10 minutes. So I want to put you in groups of 2 or 3, and I want you to talk about your final projects. You've submitted your final project, kind of rough proposal and ideas. And now that we've had this class, I want you to be thinking about what stats you would run. And to think about what stats you would run, you need to think about how are you measuring usability, and is it binary or continuous data? So talking this out with someone else is really useful. And I have a few prompts for you. So like explain the experience you plan to test in a couple sentences. Are you doing a formative or summative test? Are you comparing 2 things? How are you going to measure usability? We talked about success, failure, time on task, number of clicks, count of errors, all of these different things, the SEQ, right? And if you're trying to report on an estimate, which statistic would you run and why? The walled/adjusted walled or the t interval? Which would you run and why? So I'm going to paste these questions in the chat, and then I'm going to put you all into breakouts. Any questions on what you're discussing with someone else? Pretty much get a sanity check from your peers on your final project. Okay, almost done. Okay, rooms are open. You're in pairs, and I'll set a timer.
Oh, you're not gonna like my proposal because mine's a time on task. And I was like,
It's okay. No matter how many times I tell people I don't like time on task, usually half of the final projects contain time on task. And I encourage you to practice it. I mean, I'm just one person with one opinion. So power to you and your time on task.
I'll measure it, but hide it from you.
That's fine. Or like measure it and, get feedback. I'm not going to mark you down if you report time on task. I will mark you down if it's the only thing you quantify and it tells you nothing. And if I look at your data set and if you had run any other stat, it would have told you something. But other than that, you're not going to get marked down. Yes. How was that? Did questions emerge for anyone that you'd like to bring up or discuss?
Yeah, when we were going through this lecture today, I realized, wow, I have no way I'm gonna actually measure this, or haven't even considered that. But I think the whole summative versus formative actually helped me realize I'm actually doing a summative approach for mine. So I think it cleared up a lot of things, and just talking through it did as well.
Good. I'm glad you're starting to think about that now, because the sooner you come to the realization that you don't have like a quantifiable measure, the faster we can attack it. And if you haven't run like 5 participants or something in a situation where you don't have anything quantifiable. But remember, you can quantify anything. So if you just did a big qual usability test, and again, 3 people come up with the same comment, now you have 3 out of 10 or whatever your sample size is, and you can report on that confidence interval. Teresa?
Yeah, one thing that came up for me and Smearty is like determining, I guess, the scope of how much to collect and run tests on, because it's kind of tempting to want to collect like the rating scale data, but then also like some qualitative like quotes or like think aloud, and then also the success failure or like which option they choose. So I guess just like defining which test is the most important, or if you recommend running multiple.
Yeah, in the real world, you'll often collect 2 or 5 different measures of usability. Success failure, error count, number of clicks away from the happy path, time on task, a rating scale to the standard ease question. So usually you'll collect all kinds of stuff. And if you're on the fence right now, I suggest pick 2 and write them into your research plan and collect both. Just like we did earlier with Smearty, like I captured success failure. She had a bunch of qualitative data. I could have done better prompting her for that qualitative data, and like her level of confidence on each screen could have just asked her to weigh in about that. And then at the end, I asked her the SEQ, and that whole usability test took like 5 minutes. So you could definitely mimic that sort of pattern and then quantify one of those. And then if you have time, quantify all of them. Yeah. Great. Any other questions or comments that came up for you? I love that Ian said, what am I even measuring and how am I measuring it? And then like I saw 4 or 5 of you go like this. So you're going to get that feedback from me on your assignment, but I might, as you know by now, I might provide like, it could be this or it could be that. And then you'll have a little bit of some help in that direction. But anything we covered today is fair game. Okay, final thoughts, questions on the project? Let me just explain your homework assignment and then you're all good to go. So you're creating a research plan. That is the homework that is due on April 4th. Creating a research plan. And I always click share. For every test you ever do, you're probably going to have to create some kind of research plan to think through your test design, the timeline you're proposing. Maybe you'll hand it off to somebody else to complete, or maybe you'll collaborate with someone else and they're going to go, okay, so we're showing up to a parking lot and then what's happening? And like how many screens and like what are we going to say? And what are we measuring? What notes should I take? right? All of this goes into a research plan. To help you with homework 7B, I have a template that you can use as a guidepost for the sections that I want to see. But essentially, if you walk through the rubric, which I posted in the assignment description to encourage you to just step by step this thing, you'll get nearly full points on this. And a lot of feedback, and I don't know, it depends on the quality of the work, obviously, but you'll have the opportunity to get full points. So summarizing the project, if you don't know by now, everything has to have an introduction of what are we testing and why does it matter and what's the platform, what's the organization, what do they care about? Your goals, how you would screen participants, people who have never parked in Salt Lake City before, people who don't have the Salt Lake parking app installed, whatever that is. Usability test design and procedures. This is where you're going to tell me formative or summative. What measures are you going to observe or have them report on? What are you going to capture? How are you going to do the analysis? This can just be a couple sentences, pulling from something today, or saying you're going to statistically compare two things. And then if you want to make this really realistic, you could put in a timeline and a budget. So here's the template. You could ask any of your favorite chatbots for probably an even better template than this. So definitely pursue that path. And once you have a draft, like maybe plug it into ChatGPT and see if there could be some improvements there. Please don't give me word salad though. Like don't let ChatGPT write your intro. It's always awful. Okay, the gray text is my helper text. You should delete it. Every time I give people this template, I get these words back at me. It's like, no, this is just my helper text to help you know what to write here. So summarize your research questions. What are your research goals? Any hypotheses you're going to test? Screener, how are you going to sample? Totally fine to say convenience sample, classmates of this class. Convenience sample, students at the Claremont colleges. Sample size calculation, and then how, for each research question you're saying, how are you going to test that? What measurement rolls up to that question? So if we want to say like, we think that people will be able to successfully complete a parking session in under 3 minutes because I want to measure time on task, then that's your hypothesis. What will you need to do and measure to confirm that? Success, failure, number of seconds on task, etc. I want you to walk through what you're going to say to the participant if you have any prompts. So if you're going to collect any qualitative data, give me a few questions. Talk through an NDA or a consent to record. So NDA is fine to exclude here, but just ask them if it's okay to record the session if you are recording the session. And then anything you want to tell me about your analysis. If you're struggling with this part, you can just be very high level, or you can actually ask me questions and I will answer them as I grade this. So describe what tests you're going to use to assess your hypotheses. Most of you are going to be reporting an estimate, which is what we covered today in class. Some of you are comparing two things. So you might run a t-test. You might run something like a chi-squared. Okay, so follow the template. You have 2 weeks to do this. I don't go anywhere for spring break, so just Slack me if you have questions. Join me in office hours. And does anyone have any thoughts or questions on this assignment?
So you will have office hours open this week or next week?
Yes, both weeks we're not meeting for class. So yeah, happy to see you there. Okay, I'm gonna stick around for a bit, but I'm gonna let everyone go who's like dying to get out of here. Thank you so much for your participation today. This was great, and have a wonderful break. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Take care of yourselves. Do something fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
You
a quick
too.
question.